Hello, everyone. So it is a great pleasure to see you all. I'm Tomo Ishimura with the Tokyo National Research Institute for Cultural Properties, Japan. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer of this symposium entitled The First International Review Meeting on the Second Special Research Project for the World Heritage Site, Sacred Island of Okinoshima and the associated site in the Munakata region, maritime networks, exchange and changes in rituals and beliefs, for giving me this opportunity to present paper. Let me introduce myself. I'm currently engaged in research for the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage as the director of the Department of Intangible Cultural Heritage, Tokyo National Research Institute for Cultural Properties. But I started my career as an archaeologist. I entered Kyoto University in 1995 and studied archaeology. I chose Pacific archaeology as the topic of my doctoral thesis and conducted field work in Fiji. It was at that time that I met Dr. Christoph Sand, one of the presenters at this symposium. I first met him in 2002 at a conference in New Caledonia, where he was the organizer. I learned a lot from him about the Pacific archaeology. When I was excavating archaeological site on the island of Vichilev in Fiji with Professor Parinan teams from the University of the South Pacific, he visited the site and saw the excavation. That's a good memory for me. Since 2006, I have been affiliated with the Nara National Research Institute for Cultural Properties, where I have been engaged in international cooperation in cultural heritage protection. There, I have been involved in the preservation and the restoration of Bamiyan in Afghanistan and the Angkor site in Cambodia. In addition, I have also been involved in cooperating the nomination of the Namado site in the Federated States of Micronesia for a World Heritage Site, which resulted in the site being inscribed on the list of World Heritage in 2016. In addition, during my time in Nara, I have conducted research on maritime archaeology in Japan. I have been particularly interested in reconstructing the landscape of ancient ports through the analysis of paleotopography. I have also studied how the landscape looks from the sea. GIS software was useful for this analysis. In addition, my hobby is sea kayaking. So I actually went out to sea and looked at the landscape from the sea. The result of these studies are included in the presentation I'll be giving today. In 2015, I moved to the Tokyo National Research Institute. Sorry for some technical problem. So I resume. So in 2015, I moved to the Tokyo National Research Institute for Cultural Properties and was assigned to the Department of Intangible Cultural Heritage. Here, I'm mainly engaged in research for the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage, including traditional performing arts and craftsmanship. I'm also involved in the work of recording and archiving intangible cultural heritage. For example, we digitized a film in 1978 that recorded the Izaiho ritual and the making of smoked sea serpent on the island of Kudaka in Okinawa. And then we edited it to create documentary films. We are not only targeting intangible cultural heritage of Japan, but also those of other countries. For example, in 2015, we visited Kathmandu, Nepal, after the serious earthquake, and worked with the local authorities to restore the traditional village landscape and document the festive event that take place there. We are currently working with the Sudan's National Ethnographic Museum on activity of safeguarding the living heritage of Sudan, which is currently in the midst of armed conflict. By the way, I first visited Munakata in 2007 when I went to see the Miyare Festival, Miyare Matsuri, at the Munakata Taisha Shrine with the Mr. Yoshiki Fukasawa from the Nara National Research Institute for Cultural Properties and Mr. Ritsuo Uchida from the Center for the Ancient Culture, Shimane Prefecture. At the time, we were greatly assisted by the Ms. Makiko Fukushima, a curator at the Munakata Taisha Shrine. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to her again. Sorry, today she's not absent. She's absent now. In 2020, I published a book titled Exploring Fukuoka through its Topography and History. 日本語では、地形と歴史から探る福岡。Therefore, it is very and in which I wrote about the Munakata Taisha Shrine and Okinoshima. So it is very honor for me to be here today to make a presentation about Okinoshima. So thank you very much again for giving me this wonderful opportunity. So I move to the presentation entitled Okinoshima Island in the context of the maritime network around the Japanese archipelago. The ancient rituals on Okinoshima were unique and unparalleled in the Japanese archipelago. However, the ritual performed in the earliest phase shows similarity with the funeral rituals held at ancient burial mound at the same time. The period when the Okinoshima ritual began also coincided with the construction of distinctive burial mounds along the coast of the various parts of the Japanese archipelago. These were most likely the result of political activities carried out by the Yamato dynasty based in the Kinai region, present Nara, and had political influence all over the archipelago to gain control of sea transportation route. The background to this was probably changes in foreign relations with the Korean Peninsula and mainland China. The ritual on Okinoshima have continued for over 500 years from the late 4th century to the end of 9th century. The form of the ritual changed over time. However, the artifacts offered in the earliest phase of the rituals are known to be common to the grave goods in the ancient burial mound. The earliest phase of the ritual began in the late 4th century. Bronze mirrors, iron swords, magatama beads, and other items were offered on huge rocks. These artifacts are common to those buried as grave goods in burial mound from the same period. The three items, bronze mirror, iron sword, and magatama beads, are also common to the combination of the artifacts used as regalia for the imperial family, known as three sacred treasures, 三種の神器. Among them, the most important artifacts are bronze mirrors, including the Sankakubuchi Shinjukyo, triangular rimmed mirror with the design of divines and beasts. from the mid-3rd century to the 7th century, known as the Kohun period. Many bronze mirrors were buried with the dead in ancient burial mound. In the early Kohun period, from the mid-3rd century to the late 4th century, a particularly large number of the bronze mirrors were buried. Some bronze mirrors were made in mainland China, while others were made in the Japanese archipelago, and the former had been considered higher ranking treasure at the time. Among them, the mirror of this Sankakubuchi Shinjukyo had been one of the most highly ranked. Bronze mirrors were buried as grave goods in ancient burial mounds all over the Japanese archipelago. There is a tendency for higher-ranking bronze mirrors to be buried in larger burial mounds, and for the number of bronze mirrors to be large as well. It is probable that these bronze mirrors were not obtained by the local chiefs themselves, but were obtained or produced by the Yamato dynasty, which was based in the Kinai region, and distributed to the local chiefs. In other words, the local chiefs obtained the bronze mirrors in return for submitting to the Yamato dynasty. Among the bronze mirrors discovered throughout the Japanese archipelago, some are thought to have been made in the same mold. For example, bronze mirrors with the exact same design as the one discovered from Okinoshima site number 18 have been also found in the Yamaguchi prefecture and the Mie prefecture, and are likely to have been produced by the same mold. It is assumed that these bronze mirrors produced by the same model were transported as a set from the mainland China and then distributed to various regions by the Yamato dynasty. Why do artifacts offered in the ritual on Okinoshima have similarity with the grave goods in burial mounds? During the early Kohun period, when the ritual on Okinoshima began, it was extremely rare for such artifacts to be placed anywhere other than in burial mounds. Furthermore, almost no temples or shrine built for the ritual have been identified from this period. This means that the main place where rituals were performed at the time was burial mound. And main purpose of the ritual was for funeral. In that sense, the form of ritual on Okinoshima, in which artifacts were offered on the top of the rock, was exceptional for that time. The practical practice of burying artifacts, such as bronze mirrors in burial mound, has been practiced since the mid-3rd century, the beginning of the Kohun period. In fact, the practice of burying artifacts in tombs have been practiced throughout the Japanese archipelago, even before that. For example, in the Kyushu region, in the Kyushu region, the custom of burying bronze mirrors, iron salt, magatama beads, and other objects in earthenware coffins, along with the body, has been practiced since about 200 BC. However, the method of practice varied depending on the time and region. It was not until the mid-3rd century that the custom of burying artifacts in tombs built on artificial mound became uniformly practiced throughout the Japanese archipelago. What is noteworthy here is that the ritual of offering bronze mirrors and other artifacts on huge rocks began in Okinoshima more than 100 years after the ritual of burying the artifacts in the burial mounds began. So far, no evidence has been found at any archaeological site earlier than Okinoshima that these artifacts are used for anything other than burial purpose. In other words, it is highly likely that the ritual on Okinoshima were a new form of ritual that was created in the second half of the 4th century, and that practice was an appropriation of the burial ritual that does already exist. So, who performed these rituals? Since there are similarities between the artifacts discovered on Okinoshima and the grave goods excavated from burial mound in the Munakata region, so it is probable that the local chief of Munakata region were involved in the ritual. However, while many of the artifacts offered in the ritual on Okinoshima are of high rank, no similar artifacts have been found in the burial mound in the Munakata region. For this reason, it is highly likely that the Yamato dynasty took the initiative in carrying out the ritual and offering these artifacts to pray for the safety of voyage between Japanese archipelago and the Korean peninsula. In other words, these were most likely a national ritual rather than a local one. In the second half of the 4th century, when the ritual on the Okinoshima began, another major social change occurred. This was the construction of huge burial mounds along the coast. Examples of these maritime burial mounds, so-called maritime burial mounds, include the Goshikizuka burial mound in Hyogo Prefecture, Yanai Chausuyama burial mound in Yamaguchi Prefecture, and the Shinmei-yama and the Amino-Choshiyama burial mounds in Kyoto Prefecture. These burial mounds were built in important locations along sea route. For example, the Goshikizuka burial mound was built on the coast overlooking the Akashi Strait and is 194 meters long. The surface of the mound is decorated with stones and pots, and it is believed that it once shone white, reflecting the sunlight. Since the mound can be seen from the sea, it is thought to have also served as a landmark for voyagers. In 1986, Professor Koichi Mori, an archaeologist with Dosha University, argued that the maritime burial mound was used as a target for navigation. However, few studies have shown what these burial mounds actually look like from the sea. Navigation in ancient Japan was basically coastal navigation. Therefore, it was important to be able to visually recognize characteristic landscape on the land from the sea. By measuring the angle of multiple landmarks from the navigator's point of view, she or he was able to identify her or his position. This skill is called yama-ate in Japan, and even today, with the development of GPS, some older fishermen can still use this skill. However, when we are on the sea, we cannot see a wide range since the Earth is round. Considering the size of the ancient boat and assuming that the navigator's viewing height is only 1 meter above the sea level, she or he can only see a circle with a radius of 3 kilometers. Anything outside of it will be hidden behind the horizon. As a result, only the part of distant island above the horizon are visible, and the parts below it are not visible. Visibility from the sea is limited, So it is common for a higher mountain to be used as a landmark for navigation. A target at low elevation near the coast may be hidden below the horizon, so the navigator can only see it when approaching it. For this reason, barrier mounds used as a navigation point must actually be located in a place visible from the sea. In this presentation, I verified that such barrier mound can actually be seen from the sea by analysis using GIS. I use GIS software of Kashmir 3D to reproduce the image how the barrier mounds look from the sea. This GIS software can display landscape in three-dimensional from arbitrary points and altitudes. I set the altitude to 1 meter to reproduce the view from the sea, for considering the size of the boat at that time. It is likely that the height of the viewpoint at the sea was quite low. The following site of maritime barrier mounds are analysis. The Goshikizuka Barrier Mound in Hyogo Prefecture, the Yanai-Chauseyama Barrier Mound in Yamaguchi Prefecture, the Shinmei-yama Barrier Mound and the Amino-Choshiyama Barrier Mound in Kyoto Prefecture. The first two are located by waterways, and the latter two by ports. Case study 1, Goshikizuka Barrier Mound. The Goshikizuka is a keyhole-shaped barrier mound with a length of 194 meters. It is estimated to have been built in the second half of the 4th century. It is located on the coast of the mainland Honshu, overlooking the Akashi Strait, and can be seen well from the sea. The Akashi Strait is the entrance to the Osaka Bay and is one of the rough spots in the Seto Inland Sea with the fast current. The Goshikizuka is positioned in one of the most important places on the sea route of Seto Inland Sea. The picture on the top left shows the topography around Goshikizuka display using GIS. The keyhole-shaped form of Goshikizuka can be clearly seen even on the current topographical map. The picture on the bottom right shows a three-dimensional view of the landscape when looking in the direction of Goshikizuka from the point indicated by the yellow arrow. The white part is Goshikizuka. As you can see, this mound is easily visible from the sea. Case study 2, Yanai-Chauseyama Barrier Mound. The Yanai-Chauseyama is a keyhole-shaped barrier mound with a length of 80 meters. It is estimated to have been built in the second half of the 4th century, almost the same time as the Goshikizuka. It is located near the entrance of the channel that once exists. This channel was a shortcut for avoiding the need to go around the Murotsu Peninsula and was an important point for maritime traffic. The Yanai-Chauseyama Barrier Mound can be easily seen from the sea near the entrance of the channel. In addition, a huge bronze mirror measuring approximately 45 centimeters in diameter was excavated from the Yanai-Chauseyama. This is one of the largest bronze mirrors ever found in Japan. Case study 3, Shinmei-yama Barrier Mound. The Shinmei-yama is a keyhole-shaped barrier mound with a length of 190 meters. It is estimated to have been built in the second half of the 4th century. It is located near a lagoon that once existed. it is considered that this lagoon was once used as a good natural harbor. Since the Shinmeyama Barrier Mound can be easily seen from the offshore, I assume that it was a target for navigation that indicated the position of the port. Case study 4, Amino-Choshiyama Barrier Mound. The Amino-Choshiyama is a keyhole-shaped barrier mound with a length of 201 meters. It is estimated to have been built in the second half of the 4th century. It is located near a lagoon that once existed. It is considered that this lagoon was once used as a good natural harbor, like the case of Shinmeyama. Since the Amino-Choshiyama Barrier Mound can be easily seen from the offshore, I assume that it was also a target for navigation that indicated the position of the port. It is probable that these barrier mounds were constructed by the local chiefs with the backing of the Yamato dynasty, because no large barrier mounds exist in this region prior to the construction of them. And the region had neither high productivity nor high population enough to construct such huge monuments. It is highly likely that Yamato dynasty's purpose in having these maritime barrier mounds built was to strengthen their control over the maritime route. In other words, they wanted to strengthen political relations with the local chiefs who were at the key maritime transportation points. And by showing the barrier mound as landmarks to the people, they express the widespread influence of the Yamato dynasty. In addition, I demonstrate whether Okinoshima is actually visible from the Kyushu, mainland Japan. As this GIS image shows, it is possible to see Okinoshima from the coast of Munakata. So I'm sorry that the position of the yellow arrow is wrong. So it's more left side. So this GIS image, so the Okinoshima can be seen very small dot, but when this is a photo of Okinoshima taken from the coast of Munakata, so you can clearly see the maybe day before yesterday you also saw these images. Thus, it is likely that Okinoshima was used as a navigational point when sailing from the mainland Japan to the Korean peninsula. The start of Okinoshima ritual in the second half of the 4th century and the construction of the maritime barrier mounds are both highly likely to have been undertaken by the Yamato dynasty in order to exert their power over the sea. So why did they do these things? One of the purposes was for the Yamato dynasty to expand its control over the entire Japanese archipelago. From the mid-3rd century, when the Kohun period began, the Yamato dynasty distributed bronze mirrors and other artifacts to local chiefs, expanding its political influence. By the latter half of the 4th century, its influence had spread nationwide. It is probable that control of maritime route was one part of this process of expanding its influence. The other purpose was to respond to the changes in foreign relations with the Korean peninsula and mainland China. From the mid-3rd century to the first half of the 4th century, the Wei and the Western Jin dynasties were in power in mainland China, and it is assumed that the Yamato dynasty obtained bronze mirrors and other artifacts from these Chinese dynasties. However, after the fall of Western Jin dynasty in AD 313, various powers rose up in strife in mainland China, and the political turmoil continued. On the Korean Peninsula, Daifeng Commandery, the base for the Western Jin dynasty, in Japanese Rakurogun, Taihogun, disappeared in AD 313, and the state of Kokuryo, Baekje, and Shira began to fight each other for control of the peninsula. At the time, the people of the Japanese archipelago did not have the technology to refine iron, so they had to obtain iron ingot from the Korean peninsula. To obtain iron resources, the Yamato dynasty needed to have a political influence on the Korean peninsula, and for that, it was important to secure a sea route connecting the Japanese archipelago and the Korean peninsula. In this background, it is probable that the ritual began in Okinoshima, located halfway between the Japanese archipelago and the Korean peninsula. After that, the Yamato dynasty intervened politically in Korean peninsula several times. From around AD 391, the Yamato dynasty sent troops to the Korean peninsula and fought against Kokuryo, as recorded in the stone monument called the Kingugangeto Stele, Kingugangeto Stele, Kokaido Ohi in Japanese. After the ritual on Okinoshima continued, although their contents changed over time. As the Kohun period ended in the 7th century, the practice of burying artifacts in burial mound declined, and major rituals shifted to being held in imperial palace and Buddhist temples. However, the ritual on Okinoshima continued, eventually ceasing at the end of the 9th century. In that sense, the ritual on Okinoshima are a survival of an ancient form of ritual from the Kohun period. The most likely reason for the discontinuation of the ritual on the Okinoshima was changes in foreign relations. The imperial court in Japan, which developed from the Yamato dynasty, established diplomatic relations with the Sui and Tang dynasty of mainland China from the 7th century onwards, and regularly dispatched diplomatic missions to the country. However, the Tang dynasty fell into decline in the second half of the 9th century, and the security situation worsened in mainland China. As a result, the imperial court in Japan decided to stop sending diplomatic missions to the Tang dynasty in AD 894. Shira on the Korean peninsula also fell into decline at the end of the 9th century, resulting in political turmoil. In response to these circumstances, the imperial court in Japan began to distance itself from exchanges with the mainland China and the Korean peninsula. So it is highly likely that these changes led to the discontinuation of the ritual on Okinoshima. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.